Hello everybody and welcome to Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival 2021. And how wonderful to see you all here in a room, masked up or not. Just so great to have you all in one place. But we also know that there's an audience joining us on Zoom, including those throughout New South Wales who are watching from their local library or from home, courtesy of the library. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional owners of this land, and to pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. My name is Sue Turnbull, and I'm actually chair of BAD at the moment. I'm an academic, a crime reviewer, a crime reader, and a sister in crime as well. And I'm delighted to be with you here in the Dixon Room today, talking to Sarah Bailey, who has come all the way up from Melbourne to join us today. And welcome, Sarah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Just a few things. We're in the early stages, and you'll probably get very used to these instructions as we go along. But you will notice that we're following COVID protocols. We're all double vaxxed. We're all checked in with our QR codes. And we should keep our masks on except when eating or drinking, or in the case of the speakers, when we're on stage. Social distancing means there are restricted numbers in the room, and please try to respect the protocols as we go along. Hand sanitizer is available at the door, and let a volunteer know if you're feeling unwell. Hoping that you've all muted your mobile phones at this point. I just turned mine off. If you're taking photos, please turn off the flash, so that you don't disturb other people. Feel free to share us on social media. It's at Bad Crimes Sydney, and the hashtag is #BadCrimeSydney. Okay, we're going to have about 10-15 minutes for questions at the end after our conversation. And if you're joining us on Zoom, please send your questions through using the chat function, and we'll have them relayed to us from our colleagues here in the room. And we'll do our best to include them. Okay, so, Sarah, it's time to get started. Here it is. I snaffled a copy as we walked across. I like to have the thing in my hand. It's a big thing, actually. The Housemate. And it's number 4 in your crime fiction career, after starting with The Dark Lake. And I'd like to actually start with The Dark Lake, because that book, when it came out, was extremely well received and won quite a few prizes. Tell us a bit about The Dark Lake and where that came from.
So I had wanted to write a book for a while, I think, and just hadn't found a story that felt like it could maintain and sustain a whole book. And then I was driving away for a weekend 5 or 6 years ago now, and just started playing around with this idea in my mind about a high school teacher that would be found murdered after a school play that she had put on. And then what if the sort of police officer that was assigned to her case had gone to school with her? So I think I was really interested in dual narratives and sort of those, you know, a historical kind of thread and then a present day thread as well. And so that idea sort of started bouncing around in my mind, and I think just more than anything else, it was the only idea that stuck and kind of stayed there and kept bothering me. And so I wrote the prologue that night, and then that essentially didn't change the whole time. Everything else changed, but the prologue pretty much stayed intact. And yeah, I sort of, I guess through that process, found Gemma Woodstock, the detective character, and I think she just proved to be a really fun, great vehicle to build stories around.
Because you start off in the regions. The Dark Lake is in whereabouts is it notionally? I know it's not a real place, but where is it notionally?
Yeah, it's like a regional inner town in New South Wales. So it's hot. It's North New South Wales. It's sort of hot, but it doesn't exist in real life. And in terms of kind of the actual geography and characteristics, it's actually a bit more sort of Albury-Wodonga-esque than it is where it's supposed to be on the map. But again, I liked the idea of a small town that had kind of been limping along, that sort of suddenly was revived with this influx of people coming in to build a satellite kind of manufacturing industry, which I think always is a struggle for a town that's sort of been quite set in its ways. So, yeah, that's sort of where it came from. But I then got sick of. I get bored, obviously, and I keep moving it around.
you do, and we're going to get to Melbourne eventually. But were you from a regional background, a regional town? Okay,
not at all. I have travelled quite a lot for work and stayed in a lot of regional towns with working on different clients and things, and so that is sort of something that I have observed, that sort of manufacturing, moving in, and all of the drama that can kind of cause. But no, I have never lived anywhere else really at all apart from Melbourne.
Okay, so The Dark Lake was incredibly well received. As I said, it won a Davitt, it won a Ned Kelly Award for a Best First Novel. Was that daunting? I mean, you want to have success, but when you've had success with the first one, how do you approach the second one, or were you already writing it by that time?
I couldn't really believe it, to be honest, and I think maybe because I was so naive about the whole industry, it was helpful, because I didn't even really perhaps appreciate how lucky that was at the time. It just felt like, I felt so lucky to have an agent respond to my first email, and then to have someone publish the book, and then to have people editing. Like, the whole thing kind of felt like these lucky gates that kind of were being unlocked, and I think that by the time that happened, I was writing the second book, so I'd already kind of committed to an idea, which is probably good. I think I was already well on my way to sort of having drafted that second story, and it was just so lovely to have people like the book. I mean, some people hate it, but that's fine. But it was nice. It was nice to have such positive feedback from the industry, I guess.
So did you imagine it as a trilogy when you started? Because in some ways it is a sort of trilogy. I mean, 3 books is a trilogy with the same character, but you didn't imagine it like that? Not even
the smallest bit. I don't think even until perhaps right toward the end of the editing process had I sort of started to think, oh, now what will happen when this book is finished? Like, I guess do I want to write another one? And I'd probably just started playing around with the idea of wanting to write another book, but hadn't really even thought about whether that would be another book with the same character in it or not. And then it turned out that that was offered up as an opportunity to me, and I think by then I'd started to want to write another story with Gemma in it. So that, I did have to sort of work out then what would happen next, because there was no plan.
Okay, so where did this one come from? You say at the end that the idea for this book had been rattling around in your brain for some time. Where did that idea come from?
I think I have a lot of ideas rattling around in my brain, so some of them are pretty terrible, and they just stay there, and that's probably a good thing. And I think with this one, I just kept having this. I remember talking to a friend about it sort of, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, and just having this idea around a dinner party sort of going very badly. And I think in the first iteration of the idea, I liked the idea of almost like a locked room mystery where everyone at the dinner table was sort of a suspect and you didn't know what happened, which I still think sounds quite good, but I didn't ever seem to be able to pull it through to an actual story. And then I think at the same time I kind of had another adjacent idea that sort of involved a podcast and someone, mapping back in time, trying to work out what had happened. And I think I tried to squish those two things together for a while and make them work as one idea. And when I say try, I didn't do anything except for think about it. But I was like, I can't quite work out how this could work, and just didn't seem to have the hook that I needed. And I think for a very sort of fleeting little moment, I actually thought, could Gemma be in this book? Could she be the could she be trying to solve this sort of dinner party crime? And that didn't really work either. And then, I think once I kind of decided I wanted to push it a bit further and turn it into sort of a journo procedural, or whatever that term would be, I think it found like a groove. And that true crime sort of cold case getting hot felt solid.
There's quite a few themes in there which are in the book. Can I just have invite the audience? How many people here have actually read The Housemate already? Aha, quite a few. Excellent. For those who haven't, would you be able to give us just a synopsis without any spoilers, right? For those who are in the room and haven't had a go at it yet.
I will try. So the book is about a trio of housemates who live together in a share house in St Kilda, and after a party, one is dead, one is missing, and the other one is accused of murder. And then fast forward 10 years later, that cold case, by that time it's a cold case, it kind of hots right back up again because the missing person is discovered dead. And so Ollie Groves is the journalist who worked on the story as a junior reporter and who is sort of reassigned to the current day story.
That's it in a nutshell. So we have these three housemates in St Kilda and a very strong sense of place in St Kilda as well. But Olive Groves, somebody says your parents must have been, particularly mean to give you a name, Olive Groves. Where did she come from? Where did Olive come from?
I'm not sure. I don't know where characters come from really, but they come very formed in my mind, and I think it's the best part of writing is to have these people turn up and be as real as possible. It's really fun. I think it's really exciting, and I think she sort of in my mind was this really interesting person. She's a journalist. She's very ambitious. She's frustrated, and sort of like Gemma, my other protagonist, she's got a lot going on in her professional world, but she's also got a lot going on in her personal world as well. And I think the way that those two things interact is always really interesting to me.
Yes, because you've made her. Is she married to the?
They're engaged.
They're
to
engaged.
Be married. Yeah.
Yes, but they're living together, and she is now the stepmother for two twin girls who I have to say are extremely spooky. The twins are terrifying.
They are creepy. Yeah.
There's a couple of creepy twins in there, and meanwhile she's in this relationship with this guy who she's known for 10 years, and he's creepy too. I mean, you managed to actually make everybody kind of creepy by the end.
I do like creepy children. I think they're funny, but I think a big thing with this character of Ollie is, in many ways, she finally has everything she's ever wanted, and I think it's really interesting to start a book in that place, because often you finish books in that place. Not mine, but a lot of narratives finish with sort of the thing all working out, and in some ways Ollie starts the book with everything being what the sort of 10-year previous version of herself would have thought was it, would have been so happy with that, but she's not happy. And so I think a big part of the story is her wrestling with that and kind of trying to work out why this thing that she's wanted, being Dean, suddenly isn't actually really what she wanted after all.
She wanted the guy, she got the guy, and it's not quite what she really wants. And he's bought her a beautiful car, and she just eats junk food in the car, and etc. She has a junk food thing too, which I kind of find rather endearing. She's making smoothies, kale smoothies for the creepy twins at breakfast, and then picks up a McMuffin on the way to work. And you've made her a journalist, and Gemma was a police woman, a police officer, I should say. Now, what was your knowledge of those worlds? I mean, with a police procedural, you've got to know about the police. With a journalist, you've got to know about journalism. How did you investigate those worlds? Because you're actually in advertising.
Yes, yes, I know. I think I'm really drawn to careers that have purpose, because mine is sort of questionable potentially. But I've always been fascinated by journalists. I really wanted to be one when I was a teenager, and that's what I studied. So I'm really living a bit of a parallel life, I think, in writing The Housemate. But my knowledge of that world is fairly limited to sort of the work experience I did going back like a really long time. Right. So I guess it gave me a good basic, like I've been in newsrooms and I did do some work experience in both print and TV. So I've seen kind of how that world works, but not in a recent way. So I did befriend a journalist a few years ago at a party, and I said, I will definitely follow you up and make you talk to me about your day-to-day work, and which he did and was very generous with his time. And then I went to quite a few court cases as well, just ones that you're allowed to go and observe, and that was really helpful, not just from a court case point of view, but also just watching the journalists and how they behave in that environment, talking to each other afterwards, how that kind of all works. That was really helpful as well. And then the police piece was much more difficult. I do a lot of the research online because a lot of it is available online in terms of just process and procedural and what order things happen in and all of that sort of thing. But I have befriended a couple of people that have been really nice in terms of talking to me about what's not feasible. But I tend to kind of go to them with questions that are more around not asking them to sort of lay out a whole kind of explanation as to how something could work. It's more me sense checking to say, is that actually possible though? Yeah. So it's more of a fact check piece as opposed to having them help me craft the narrative, because I think that would make me too impatient. So do you send drafts to your coterie of supporters, or do you just questions? Just questions. Just questions. You just say, would this possible? Would this happen? Yes. Is this realistic? Normally it's, is this feasible? Yeah. Like in any possible way. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was rereading the book, and I actually love the description that you have. The offices that Ollie is going to sort of sounds a bit like the Age offices in Spencer Street, right? It's that kind of building. Yeah. And there's this wonderful kind of hierarchy thing that's happened on the floors. Do you want to describe that? Because it's revelatory in terms of what's happening to journalism. Can you describe what happens on the floors in this building? Yeah, so just for some context too. So in the book, there's sort of this running joke about the fact that the digital department has suddenly been elevated to the top floor because they're suddenly more important than like the research and the actual journalists. Real journalists, I guess some people would say. And I did borrow that a little bit from an agency that I worked at a few years ago, where one of the creative directors came in and decided that the creatives needed to be on the top floor and flipped the whole agency upside down. And it was a bit of a weird power play thing that everyone kind of found quite strange. So I think it does happen in other workplaces, but in this particular book, in The Housemate, it's symbolic of, I guess, the insecurity that some of the more traditional journalists are feeling around the profession, the standard of the profession, what's digital and technology doing to the profession, the 24-hour news cycle. And I guess Ollie in particular is very much an old-fashioned journalist. And even though she's actually not old, she really wants to hang on to that sort of sense of what's right and wrong and proper. And she finds all of the kind of new age technology and the podcasting all very naff and quite sort of superficial. So that's a big tension in the book, that kind of Gen X, Gen Y, millennial sort of tension. And so we come to the character that you say in the end of your afterword that you absolutely loved writing, which is the character of Cooper Ing. Can you describe the character of Cooper for us? Yeah, so Cooper is sort of, I guess he becomes Ollie's sidekick / partner, but at the start of the book, she's very begrudgingly spending time with this person in a professional arranged marriage, I suppose, where her boss kind of pairs them together because of the circumstances of this story. And she feels like she's sort of babysitting this, 20-odd-year-old newbie who's come into the work world with so much enthusiasm, but in her view, very little talent and ability. And I guess I work in an industry where experience is becoming really interesting as a leverage point, because you can be really experienced but not know how to do things that are needing to be done from a technology point of view. And I find that really interesting to sort of see how workplaces and the industries are placing different value on different skills. And I think a lot of people are finding that really difficult to navigate. I find it difficult to navigate. I can't use half the programs, but I think I'm still smart. It's sort of like, how do you kind of grapple with that? And so Ollie Cooper is like the sort of human version of all of her insecurities bundled up and just yapping at it all the time. And he's annoying and chatty and overconfident and doesn't know what he doesn't know, and all of those kind of stereotypical millennial things. But he's also got a really good brain, and he's interesting and clever and sweet. And so it's, I guess their relationship, I think, goes on quite a nice journey.
And they end up working on a podcast together. And one of the things you've given Ollie is a wonderful husky radio voice.
Yes.
Did that happen before the podcast, or was that in the process of...
Well, I just think because she wanted to be a journalist, and I guess when you start out, you've got a choice around what medium you sort of pursue. I liked the idea of her having this really distinctive voice that people would potentially think was a big draw card. But she has some unfortunate kind of encounters with male executives and kind of just ends up retreating almost into print because it feels like a safer place where she can sort of hide. And she's quite attractive, and I think she didn't want to draw attention to herself because she's kind of got a lot of other baggage from the past that makes that something that she feels uncomfortable with. So the voice, I think, is something that is like a distinctive asset for her, but one that she has got a confusing relationship with. She doesn't like that she's got this kind of distinctiveness about her. She doesn't really like to stand out.
And so they're working on this podcast together, and it's a true crime podcast about this case. The true crime podcast has become such a phenomenon. I mean, when you started the book, did you know you were going to have a podcast in there? They're cropping up in all sorts of books at the moment.
Yeah, I really wanted to, but it did mean that I changed the timeline of the book a couple of times because I wanted it to be set in a time frame where Ollie didn't know how popular podcasts were going to become, so that it didn't make her look like a real sort of Luddite in terms of jumping on the bandwagon. So the book is set in a time frame where she's still very sceptical about the medium, and that makes sense. Yes. Whereas if you said it now, everyone would go, well, quite obviously that's taken off and it's a really popular thing. So that was a big part of the timeline choice, was really to make that podcast uncertainty make sense. But yeah, I mean, it's become so popular so quickly, and not surprisingly really, because it's got all the right ingredients of what people are looking for from a story point of view. So, I think in a way it was sort of predictable, but yeah, I don't think anyone could have predicted just like quite how prolific it all became and how much a part of journalism it's become too.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you had to start adjusting the timeline. Because you oscillate between, I think, is it 2005 and 2015? Am I?
Yeah.
Yep. So we've got the original Housemate case from 2005, and then we're revisiting it 10 years later. So this is a kind of technical question as a writer. How did you structure beforehand? Are you a whiteboard person? How did you manipulate those time frames?
No, I really, really, really wish I was though. But no, I don't. I really find it hard to plan things out. I spend time planning it out and making it look nice, and then I look at it and just think it just doesn't seem to translate to anything that I'm actually doing on the page. I think the only thing that's useful for me in terms of trying to plot and plan things out is that I ended up just thinking in my head while I'm doing this sort of writing stuff down on the wall or whatever, and that's helpful. But the actual things that I'm writing down are kind of neither here nor there. But I did in my head plan out the 2 timelines and played around a lot with what needed to happen in each of those threads, and then just getting the characters kind of clear in my mind around what their relationships were in each time frames and what had changed in that time as well, because 10 years is not long, but at the same time the technology had just completely changed. Yep. You know, things like Facebook didn't exist, or were just sort of emerging in the first timeline of the book, and then 10 years later in 2015 more than half the planet's sort of on it. So there's some things that have changed a lot in a short space of time. So the world had changed from a platform's point of view, and then Ollie's personal world had obviously completely changed. So it was kind of, I think, nice to see her in that former timeline, and then throwing her into this new updated world with this new updated life was it was fun to sort of play around with. But I did have to do a lot of editing.
So when you're writing, it sounds to me like you're creating as you're writing. You're not writing to a plan, and that your writing will then surprise you. Something might happen, or a character might emerge that is actually not what you expected. Did you have any moments with this book?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so much chat about people that plan their books and people that just write sort of as they go. I still think even when you write as you go, you probably plan in your head. Like I definitely plan stories out in my mind and think about them quite a lot before I write them down. So I guess there is still some planning, but I don't tend to write sort of proper book plans and chapter plans and things like that. So I definitely had the overall kind of the key characters and the what happened and sort of when and to who. Things did change as I went along, but the general structure kind of stayed in place. But Cooper just appeared out of nowhere, and I kind of knew that I would have a podcast. I think originally I thought maybe Ollie would sort of come up with the idea, or maybe the guy that she's quite competitive at work would be the driving force of that, and it would be sort of like this really a point of tension between them. And then, I think as I was writing, I was like, no, it makes so much sense for some young millennial that's just been 1 year into the job to sort of pop up and have been given this big responsibility, and Ollie just to be so mad about it, and to sort of transfer all of her frustrations about the industry onto this poor kid. And so that just felt right. Yeah. And then Cooper's dialogue is really fun and snappy and funny, and I think he just ended up being someone that it made sense to have in the book a lot. Yeah.
He's a fun character to read.
Yeah, he is.
We won't say anything more about that. So is Ollie going to go into another book? Or is her story done? I mean, I just wondered, where would you go next? Where do you think you'll go next?
I'm not sure. I would never say never, because I don't know. And sometimes I don't know. Like I said, I've got a few different ideas, and maybe Ollie could work within one of those. But I didn't write this book with a series planned out, or another sort of chapter that specifically I had earmarked for her to do. So maybe, I'm not sure.
So there's not a book actually being written at the moment?
No. The only thing I'm working on at the moment is working with a production company on a film treatment for the Dark Lake. So going back to sort of Gemma again, and trying to work out how that story could turn into an episodic TV type structure. So it's really familiar, obviously, but different as well, because there's some things about that book that work really well I think might work well in TV, but there's some things that don't sort of make so much sense. So it's, different type of
now you're talking my language, of course, because one of my areas is television. I do a lot around TV series. So are they aiming for a 6-part series?
Yeah.
So then you've got to restructure your plot into the 6-episode structure and keep it moving along?
Yes, that is, I think, what they would like, yes.
Yeah, and they haven't started casting or anything. We're still with the script at the moment.
I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I think it's more story at the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And sorry. And what's the look that they're going for? Are they going for kind of Nordic noir in New South Wales, perhaps?
I think setting-wise, they are very open to it being like whatever is sort of appropriate. I think the story is not so Australian that it would have to be Australian. You know, it's not sort of tied to the land in a really specific way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that part's a little bit open, as long as there's a lake, I guess. Which I did say that. I was like, I think there has to be somewhere, though, that there is a lake, because obviously that is pretty important.
Well, there's a good Scandinavian kind of look for you already, a body of water, and there you are.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I have a lot of other ideas for books and things, and I've started a few little... I start a lot of things, and then they sit there for a long time. So some are sort of like big starts, and others are like a paragraph start. So it's, yeah, a few different thoughts.
Well, I'm really interested in the fact that, you know, we spoke 2 bads ago, and I remember being astonished at that time because you're a single mum with 2 small children and a full-time job, and it's like, when and where do you write?
I don't know. I find this question really difficult because I don't know. I think I just really like writing, and so when I'm not doing it, I want to be doing it, and so I think that's when I just find the time to sort of do it. But definitely sometimes are easier than other times. And I mean, in a way, like lockdown actually was probably easy last year. I was in Melbourne, so it was a long lockdown time. Yeah. And, you know, me not being allowed to go out was actually quite helpful too, because I do really like going out as well, but I kind of had to just sit at home. And so I was, forced to kind of write a lot at night, and I don't know. I'm really interested in time and how people spend their time and what they choose to kind of pay attention to, and I think that, I guess for me, I kind of have this ongoing battle with my own sort of time and attention, and I feel like, well, if you want to write, then you just got to do it, and so then I'm like, right, we'll just do it now then, and then sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Yeah. But I think I do also write quite quickly, which I think helps. I think I do a lot of thinking, so that when I sit down to write, it is quite like a download type approach. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not a disciplined person in the sense that, like, I write every day and that's a rule. I'm absolutely not like that at all.
So you don't have some people have a daily word count rate or something like that. You're a wait for the inspiration and the moment person.
Yeah, and I think I'm more just deadlines, self-imposed deadlines, and it's not sort of a daily type thing. It's more of all right, well, if you want to get this done by a certain time, you're going to kind of have that goal in mind and just make that work however it's going to work between now and that time. And then that's kind of just on me, I guess, to figure out. Yeah. Yeah.
So did you always want to be a writer? You said you wanted to be a journalist.
Yeah, I really wanted to be a journalist, and then...
Because I often think, most people who want to be a writer go into journalism because it's words anyway.
Yes, yeah. I definitely, that was sort of what I really wanted to pursue, and then it really kind of was only that when I was starting to actually think about finishing uni and doing, applying for jobs, they sort of said, look, you're going to have to move to a regional area and work your way back into the city. Like, that's the only way it will work. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to do that. I've just moved out in the city. So I kind of ended up falling into PR and advertising really by accident, and then loved it. So stayed at that first company for 13 years. And I think just, it was almost like, oh, this is all the things that I like, because it's a bit of writing, but it's also, it's organised and it's business and it's strategy and it's great people and it's fun. And so I think I just sort of ended up going, oh, well, this is actually the perfect place for me. But then, sort of 10 years later, I really did sort of feel like this, I don't know, unscratched itch where I just wanted to write, and it became really quite all-consuming. Like in my mind, I was constantly thinking about it, constantly thinking about whether I could quit my job to do it, wanted to do courses, kind of just was constantly being drawn to anything that would be more likely to make that possible. And then, I just decided I needed to put a date in the diary and go, right, I'm doing it by that date.
Okay, here's the big question. Why crime?
Oh, I think just because the idea I had ended up having a murder in it, really. So it kind of just, I think if it had been another story that came to mind, then it wouldn't have been crime, but it just turned out that way, I think.
So you weren't a crime reader as such?
I was definitely, but not exclusively. So I read a lot of crime and really liked it, really enjoyed reading crime, but also read a lot of sort of other genre pieces as well and liked those too. So I think it has ended up suiting me, and it is quite structured, which maybe I think suits me too, structured with a twist kind of thing. But it wasn't intentional. It definitely wasn't intentional. It wasn't even like, I think even as I was writing it, I wasn't even conscious of, this is a crime book. I was conscious of the content, but it wasn't until it got into that world of being more commercial that I was like, oh, I guess, yeah, right, that's a crime story, So, yeah, but I think it's been a fun genre to be within.
Well, of course, now that you're a successful author, you're asked to read other writers' books, presumably by your publisher or whatever. But
yes.
I would love to know who you read for pleasure, and there's people in this room that you might have to mention. But who do you turn to now if you want to read a crime novel? Who would you pick up?
Oh well, I mean, it's quite fraught though, because I can't read a crime book and not feel both like it's entertaining but also just so jealous because everyone is so good. And honestly, like I do sort of constantly finish books and go, oh, so annoying. It's just, I just feel like everyone is so talented, and it really is amazing to me just how many great ideas people have to build on this kind of familiar construct, but then manage to put something on top of that makes it special. Like it's amazing. But I mean, I would say almost all of my peers' books, like all Aussie crime books, I pretty much read absolutely, no exception. And I think they're all extremely impressive. And then I guess I really like an author like, say, Kate Atkinson, who I don't think is strictly a crime writer. And I just think she's sort of, beyond talented in the way that she has constructed almost like a subgenre of crime. But I do read her books and feel both kind of overwhelmed with how complicated they are, but also how enjoyable they are to read. And then, but then I really like dystopian kind of literature, and I find that really interesting kind of conceptually. Just all kinds of different things. But I don't ever feel like reading any book is a waste of time or not worthy of attention, because I think you learn something from all kinds of books, whether you like them or not, almost. Yeah,
it's a really interesting kind of to look at the genre and look at what's happened in Australia in the last 15, 20 years, the absolute sort of burgeoning of Australian crime writers. And the fact that they've moved out of the city so often into kind of regional areas. And actually, I'll be talking to Gary Disher about that in the next session, which we'll be getting to very shortly. So I think it's about time we invited the audience to join in, and you maybe don't need a question so much as a comment or to join the discussion. And we've also we might have some Zoom. No, anybody on the chat from the Zoom? No, the shy. Come on, Zoom people, you do join in. Just pop something in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Audience, people who've read The Housemate, maybe you could tell us what intrigued you about the book, or what you particularly liked. Anybody willing to have a go? All right. The question is, do you mind if I repeat it just as best I can? was that when you were writing this book, it was the moment The Dark Lake appeared at the same era of Jane Harper's The Dry, which is, of course, very Australian in its location. And were you mindful at that time of not making it specifically Australian in terms of regionality, thinking ahead to the TV series?
No, and I have a kind of a funny story about that, in that I had finished the draft of The Dark Lake and had submitted, my agent had given me some feedback, and I had resent the copy of the book back to her. So I was kind of like, oh, that's done. Little did I know that I would do a lot more editing, but I was like, oh, it's all finished. And I went that night to a Sisters in Crime event, which is the first time I'd ever been to one, and met Jane, and she was talking about this new book that was coming out in a month's time, which was The Dry. And I was sitting there thinking, like, it's not dissimilar to the concept of my book. You know, it sounds like there's some similarities. So yeah, I don't, there must have been something in the zeitgeist, I guess, potentially, that people were, I don't know if it was like the Netflix sort of influx of shows and people were kind of all thinking in similar ways. I'm not sure, but it definitely felt like there was a lot of people out there like me whose ideas had just suddenly become crime-based.
And it's interesting also, isn't it, that Jane Harper was a journalist as well, working on regional newspapers. You know, and it's and we've got Chris Hammer at the back of the room, another journalist who was... Chris Hammer's at the back of the room there. Give us a wave, Chris. There's our journalist. So many journalists. Tim Ailiff, Peter Temple was, of course, a journalist and taught journalism at... and who was I reading that was saying that he was taught by... he was taught by Peter Temple, and Peter gave him very poor marks, another crime writer, as a journalist. So something was happening around that moment, I think. Though, of course, the argument is that there was also a long, slow build-up to that. It didn't exactly come out of nowhere. Do we have another question? Yes? Yeah. Okay, just a very quick recap. The question is about Cooper Ing as a light counterpoint, and really a question about whether that was thought through, managed, imagined.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it's planned ever, but I think maybe subconsciously you sort of sense that you need to have like a comic or a sort of a counterpoint to the bleak material if you're writing crime, because I think there's a lot of great crime stories that still have some really funny, moments in them, or characters that do bring just sort of that contrast just in their personalities. And also I think like the relationships that protagonists have with, whether it's their partner, cop partners, or in personal life or whatever it might be, kids sometimes can really bring just that humanity, so it's not all just about the case, which obviously can get pretty kind of grim. So I don't think it wasn't conscious with Cooper, but I think maybe in reflection, and then when you're sort of editing and whatever, you can sort of see how, every time, it's sort of almost like every time he's on stage, it's nice and it's good banter and it gives them something else to kind of talk about. So yeah, I think maybe subconsciously that's what's happening, but not in like a planned insert nice kind of character here kind of sense. Yeah.
Have we got another question? I might just add in here. You do write very complicated women. Your female characters are very complex. They're light, dark. Sometimes you want to shake them a little bit, or just say, "Oh, stop it!" Get over it. And then with Ollie, I was going, "But please don't do any more junk food just right now." I was terribly worried about her eating habit. So tell us about those female characters. I mean, not you, it's not you, but is it intentional to make them as complicated and as contradictory and as frustrating as they are?
I think, I don't want to sound like a smart ass, but I think I just write women. I don't think I write complicated women, but I do think that, I'm kind of very big on the idea that if you're going to write a book about someone, unless the actual kind of subplot is that they're very straightforward and that's part of the actual story, that they need to be experiencing some kind of moment of reflection, tension, change. I think both of my main characters kind of so far have been at a point of like, do I want to be in the life that I've currently got? So I think that's where the complexity comes from. Yeah. They're at a crossroads and they're kind of deciding, can they keep going down the same path, or do they need to sort of make some kind of wholesale change? And that's where I think they can be really frustrating.
Yes.
And I mean, I definitely, like I sort of said before, like I definitely have a lot of people saying to me, oh, you know, they should have both just been happy with what they had. You know, they were kind of pretty good, and I think that's fair, but I guess that's just not the way a lot of the world works either.
No, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, because where does the drama come from? It comes from conflict.
Yeah.
And if you've got the conflict within the character itself, well,
Yeah.
there's your drama.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question. Then this came in on the chat. Yes. Excellent, thank you. And here is the question: who is the first person to read your first draft of a manuscript? Your agent or another trusted person?
I mean, that's changed heaps over time. So, and I think I heard someone else saying this recently, but with my first book, I was desperate for anyone and everyone to kind of read it, give me feedback, kind of, you know, does this even make sense? And does it seem even like a book? Like, I think you just can't judge your own work in any way that you feel confident about. So I was shoving chapters under several, lots of people, like parents, sister, friends, you know, whatever, and their feedback was all really, really helpful. But I feel like it was probably another form of procrastination in a way. I was kind of like, I'll give that to you so that you can read that for a few days and I can just not write for a few days and think. And I think it was a bit of a delaying tactic. Whereas now I kind of almost, I see it as a step that would just break up the momentum. So I think with my last book, I didn't show anybody until I sent it to my agent. I don't think anyone read. I didn't really tell anyone really about it. I think in terms of the story, maybe just a friend one night. I think I was sort of talking her through it, but yeah, I think it was a big procrastination device for me. So I've cut that out.
You've cut it out.
I've cut it out.
So there's the answer. No longer needs the support of readers.
Oh, I probably do need it, but I've decided to skip it.
Well, I think The Housemate is a terrific book, I have to say. It's very cleverly structured. And I actually found, and I'm not going to give a spoiler date, but I found the last few pages just, whoa. And I thought, oh, she's really pulled that off extremely well, because you go background to...
Thank you.
And I like endings like that. You know, the endings where you get to the end and you go, how did they do that? When was that set up? Did I see that coming? Do we have any more questions? Anybody else like to join in? No? If not, I think, unless there's something that you feel that we have missed that you would like to...
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. I didn't do any publicity this year, really, apart from my house, so it's just really nice to be in front of an audience of people.
Well, oh yes, they've gone...
What are Sarah's other books? I heard you say that you'd written 4 books.
Yes.
So I don't know the others, and I would like just a bit of a rundown.
Okay, Dark Lake's the first one.
Yeah, the first 3 books are a trilogy, so they're all linked, and it's a detective main character that you follow through all 3 stories. So the first one is The Dark Lake, which is set in like a regional country town, and then she moves, well, I shouldn't give it away, but the other 2 books follow her story.
Into the Night and Where the Dead Go. And have they got them on the bookstore? I hope they do. I would hope they have. Excellent,
yes,
excellent. So you can go and you can start at the beginning and work your way through, knowing that the first one might well be a TV series, which would be excellent. Okay, I think we now can wrap up. Before we do so, and before we say thank you, we'd just like to say that our speaker, Sarah, will be available to sign copies of her book opposite the State Library bookshop next to the cafe. And you can either get there by going around the street, or there will be a volunteer to show you the way. So we'll ask you to leave the room at the end of the session. Even if your next session is in here, it needs to be cleared and cleaned. And we hope you have a wonderful time in the rest of the festival. But before you go, please join with me in thanking Sarah Bailey for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.